The bell above the little jewelry shop rang as I pushed open the door and stepped inside. 5 steps down into a basement space, tucked away from Denver's bustling streets, lay a world that always felt like a secret sanctuary to me. I loved this place. It wasn't one of those glossy boutiques with young salesgirls who didn't know the first thing about stones. Here, the shelves gleamed under warm lights, the velvet trays cradled pieces like sleeping treasures, and behind the counter stood Mr. Monroe, an older gentleman with kind eyes who seemed to know exactly what would speak to my soul. "You came just in time, my dear," he greeted me warmly. "A new shipment came in yesterday, straight from overseas. Handmade, not your factory sparkle. This is the real artistry." I smiled, my fingers already itching to touch. He laid out a collection: pendants of amethyst, rings crowned with onyx, delicate chains that caught the light like whispers. But my eyes stopped when I saw it, a turquoise set. Earrings, a pendant, and a slim ring, all framed in cool silver. The stone shimmered in shades of sky and sea, threaded with veins of black. I reached out, tracing its surface. Turquoise had always fascinated me. I once read that it could mirror the emotions of the one who wore it, bright when the heart was full, dim when sorrow crept in. Was it true? I didn't know, but the thought lodged itself in me, and the stone felt alive in my hand, as though it could sense what I carried inside. As Mr. Monroe wrapped the set in soft tissue, I thought of Daniel, my second husband, and how he had promised me a surprise for our anniversary. But before that chapter, before Daniel, before this life I built with grit and stubborn will, there had been another story. My first marriage. My first foolish mistake. I can still see him, Vadim. Broad-shouldered, handsome in that careless way, all energy and recklessness. I was in college then, buried in textbooks, chasing a degree with everything I had. He was studying something. I never quite remembered what. Automotives, maybe? Roads? To me, it didn't matter. He looked at me with such adoration that for a while, I let myself believe that was enough. We married young, too young, driven by hormones and the naive idea that love could conquer every obstacle. In those first months, I thought I had found happiness. We'd rush into our tiny apartment, me dropping my bag, him sweeping me off my feet, laughter spilling into the kitchen as we cooked whatever cheap meal we could muster. He'd place flowers in a vase, eyes shining like I was the center of his world. But life doesn't stay frozen in those glowing moments. I got pregnant. Morning sickness hit me like a storm, dragging me down into exhaustion and irritability. Suddenly, the girl who used to laugh at his every joke became a woman sprawled on the couch, pale and nauseous, snapping at him when he brought the wrong kind of pickles. My hormones were merciless, and so was reality. Vadim grew restless. He wanted the carefree girl, not the woman clutching her belly, overwhelmed and afraid. I could feel him slipping away, though I tried to deny it, until one evening when denial was no longer an option. He hadn't come home. I went looking for him, my heart pounding with dread I couldn't explain. At the dorms, his friends looked at me with guilt written all over their faces. One finally confessed. Vadim was upstairs with her, a red-haired classmate of his. I remember climbing those steps, my hands trembling, so hard I could barely hold the railing. The sound of laughter behind that door is etched into me. When he finally stumbled out, eyes wide with panic, I stared at him as if he were a stranger. "Victoria, it's not what it looks like," he stammered. "Don't you dare insult me with that line," I snapped, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I'm carrying your child, and you're crawling into another woman's bed? Do you know what that does to me? To us?" He tried to reach for me, but I pulled back. My decision crystallized in that instant, sharper than any diamond. "You've betrayed me once," I said, my words steady though my chest was breaking. "And a man who betrays once will betray again. I won't waste my life waiting for the next time." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. I left him there in that hallway that smelled of beer and perfume, and I never looked back. The divorce came quickly, almost too easily. He didn't fight. Perhaps he was relieved. Perhaps he never loved me the way I had convinced myself he did. All I knew was that I stood alone, carrying a baby inside me, stripped of illusions but clinging fiercely to resolve. That was the day I promised myself I would never again be that foolish girl who believed love could replace character. I would raise my daughter, and I would build a life from nothing if I had to. I would never rely on a man again. And for a long time I kept that promise. Now, as I held the small box with the turquoise set, its colors shifting under the light, I felt the echo of that vow. The stone seemed to know the story of my heart, that I had been broken, that I had survived, and that I would wear its blue not just as decoration, but as a shield. I walked out of the shop, the spring air crisp against my face, unaware of how much darker storms still lay ahead. When the papers were signed and Vadim was out of my life, I stood at a crossroads I hadn't chosen. I was 23, pregnant and terrified. My parents lived several hours away, tied to their land, their garden, their orchard. They loved me, but they couldn't take me back without giving up everything they had built. It was my grandparents, my mother's parents, who stepped in. They didn't have money to hand me, not the kind that solves problems overnight. But they did have something else, an old warehouse on the edge of Denver. It had been sitting and used for years, nothing more than cracked concrete, rusting metal doors, and a location most people would ignore. "This place isn't much," my grandfather told me, his voice gentle but firm. "But it's yours now. You'll find a way to use it. You're clever. You always have been." I looked at the cavernous space with its broken windows and felt both despair and determination. It wasn't a gift, it was a challenge. At first, it was just about survival. I needed money for food, for diapers, for doctor visits. I started small, cleaning apartments, scrubbing offices late into the night. I'd strap baby Emily to my chest, a bottle of formula tucked into my bag, and head out. My hands were raw from bleach, my back ached from bending. But I kept moving because stopping wasn't an option. There were nights when I'd collapse onto the old mattress in the corner of that warehouse, Emily asleep beside me, the air smelling faintly of dust and chemicals. I would stare at the ceiling and whisper, "We'll make it, baby girl. I promise you we'll make it." One evening, my neighbor Mrs. Collins stopped me in the hallway of our shabby apartment building. She eyed the mop and bucket I carried. "Victoria, you're running yourself into the ground," she said, frowning. "I don't have a choice," I answered, shifting Emily on my hip. "You always have a choice. Let me watch the little one for a couple of hours. You can't do everything alone." Her kindness cracked something inside me, and I nodded, grateful beyond words. With a few helping hands like hers, I managed to take on more clients. Word spread that I was thorough, reliable, and relentless. Soon, I wasn't just scrubbing floors alone. I had 2 women working with me. We used the warehouse as our base, storing supplies and resting between jobs. I'll never forget hiring my first official employee. Her name was Maria, a single mother like me. She came into the warehouse, wiping her hands on her jeans, nervous. "Are you sure you can afford to pay me?" she asked. I laughed, though it wasn't funny. "Can you afford not to work?" She cracked a smile. "Fair point. When do we start?" "Now," I said, handing her a broom. That was the beginning of Hayes Cleaning Services, though back then it was nothing more than a few tired women trying to scrape together a living. I learned quickly how to budget, how to negotiate contracts, how to market myself with nothing but a stack of homemade flyers. The struggles were endless. Cars breaking down on the way to jobs. Clients who tried to underpay. Days when Emily spiked a fever and I had to choose between staying with her or risking the loss of a contract. I cried more than once in the bathroom, pressing my fists to my eyes so no one would see. But slowly, inch by inch, things shifted. The warehouse transformed. New shelves went up, chemicals lined in neat rows, vacuum cleaners stacked in the corner. We grew from 2 employees to 5, then 10. By the time Emily was starting kindergarten, I had an office upstairs with a second-hand desk and a phone that rang constantly. Sometimes at night, I'd stand outside the warehouse and look at the glowing sign we had managed to hang. Hayes Cleaning Services. My name, my work, my blood and sweat carved into something real. I thought back to Vadim then, to the moment I told him he'd betrayed me once and would betray me again. He was probably out there somewhere, charming some other girl, living off someone else's sacrifices. Meanwhile, I was here, breaking my body and my will to build something for my daughter. And I realized I would rather be exhausted and free than pampered and betrayed. One afternoon, as I locked up after a long day, Maria clapped me on the shoulder. "Boss," she said, grinning, "you're going to need a bigger warehouse soon." I laughed, shaking my head. "Don't call me that. I'm not a boss." She raised an eyebrow. "You pay me, don't you? That makes you the boss. Own it." Her words stayed with me. Maybe I really was becoming something more than just a desperate woman trying to survive. Maybe I was becoming a leader. The road was long, the nights were brutal, and the loneliness never quite went away. But every paycheck, every client who called us back, every smile on Emily's face when I bought her a new book or a warm coat, it reminded me why I fought. I wasn't just cleaning offices. I was building a life. It was supposed to be just a short escape, a week away from the endless grind of building my company. By then, Hayes Cleaning Services was finally standing on its own legs, and Emily was old enough to spend a few days with my parents. So, I booked a trip to Italy, a ski resort in the Dolomites that I had dreamed about for years but never dared to afford until then. The mountains stretched before me like a painting, snow glittering under the winter sun, the air so crisp it cut into my lungs with every breath. I hadn't felt so alive in years. I strapped on my skis, eager to throw myself down a challenging slope, to remember what it felt like to do something reckless just for me. That's when I saw him, or rather, I nearly tripped over him. A young man, tangled in his skis, half buried in a snowbank, with only 2 long legs sticking out at awkward angles. His bright orange hat lay several feet away. "Need some help?" I called, trying not to laugh. He looked up, his face flushed from both the cold and embarrassment. "Do I look like I've got this under control?" he shot back, grinning. I skied over, pulled him upright, and handed him his hat. He was younger than me, clearly. His features were sharp, his eyes the color of slate, his smile easy. He dusted snow from his jacket and gave me a mock bow. "Daniel Hayes, world's worst skier, at your service." I couldn't stop smiling. "Victoria," I said, "clearly the world's best rescuer." We ended up sharing the lift back up the mountain. Conversation came effortlessly, as if we weren't strangers at all. He admitted it was his first real-time skiing, that he'd come with friends, but was too stubborn to stick to the beginner slopes. I teased him about his pride. He teased me about my intensity. That evening, we met again in the resort's bar. A fireplace crackled in the corner. Glasses clinked, and the air smelled of mulled wine. We ordered 2 steaming mugs, spiced and rich, and stayed until the staff began stacking chairs. We talked about everything, his studies in law, my company, our childhood dreams, the fears we never told anyone else. For the first time in years, I felt young again. Not weighed down by responsibility, not defined by struggle or betrayal. Just a woman laughing with a man who made her feel seen. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of skiing, me guiding him down gentle slopes, him pretending to be helpless just so I would grab his arm. We ate together, we explored together, we stole moments that felt like they belonged to another life. On the last night, we walked out onto the snowy balcony, the stars scattered above us like diamonds. My breath rose in white clouds as Daniel turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I don't want this to end when we go back." I felt my heart stutter. "We live on opposite sides of the ocean. You'll finish school. I'll go back to Denver. That's not exactly simple. Nothing worth it is simple, he replied. He took my hands in his gloves rough against mine. You've built your own world, and I admire that more than I can say. But I want to be part of it. Let me. I may be younger, but I'm not a boy. I know what I want, and it's you. His words disarmed me. No one had ever spoken to me with such certainty. For so long, I had believed love was a mistake I couldn't afford to repeat. But standing there, the snow falling softly around us, I felt that dangerous flutter again, the one that made me believe. I whispered, almost to myself, "You don't even know what you're asking." "I do," he said firmly. Then, with a crooked smile, "Marry me, Victoria. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but someday soon. Say yes, and I'll prove to you every day that I'm worthy of it." I should have laughed. I should have told him he was reckless, that we barely knew each other. But instead, I felt tears sting my eyes, warmth blooming where I thought nothing could grow again. "Yes," I said, the word trembling but true. "Yes, Daniel." He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in so many years, I let myself hope. I let myself imagine a life where I wasn't alone, where someone would stand beside me, not just for the easy days, but through the storms too. We returned to Denver a few weeks later, and true to his word, he stayed. He didn't vanish like Vadim had. He didn't flinch at my responsibilities or the years between us. He stepped into my world with steady confidence, and soon we were standing at the altar, exchanging vows that I believed with all my heart. When I looked into Daniel's eyes that day, I thought I had finally found it, love that was not built on illusions or lies, but on something real. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first 3 years of marriage with Daniel unfolded like a dream I had never dared to dream. After all the battles I had fought alone, all the nights spent working myself to exhaustion, suddenly I had someone beside me. Someone who reached for my hand when I slipped my shoes off at the door, who poured me a glass of wine before I even asked, who made me laugh until my ribs ached. Our home became more than walls and furniture. It was warm with his presence. Emily adored him. She was cautious at first, protective of me, protective of the little world we had carved together. But Daniel knew how to win her over. He helped with her homework, played chess with her on rainy afternoons, and showed up at her school events with flowers as if she were his own. I would watch them together and feel tears sting my eyes. After all the chaos of her childhood, maybe she finally had the father figure she deserved. Evenings were my favorite. I'd cook. He'd hover around the kitchen pretending to help, sneaking bites when he thought I wasn't looking. "Victoria," he'd say, grinning, "you don't need me in here. You need me at the table, ready to appreciate your masterpiece." "You mean steal the bread before it's served?" I teased, swatting his hand away. "Exactly," he laughed, leaning in to kiss my cheek. We sat at the table, me, Daniel, and Emily, clinking glasses of sparkling cider for her, wine for us, laughter filling the air. For years, our meals had been rushed, eaten in silence, just me and my daughter balancing exhaustion and survival. Now, there was joy, and I found myself lingering after dinner just to savor it. On weekends, Daniel insisted on little getaways. Nothing extravagant, though sometimes he surprised me with tickets to Napa or Aspen. Mostly it was road trips to the mountains, picnics by a lake, or hiking trails where we could breathe fresh air and forget the world. He had a way of making even a short drive feel like an adventure. One afternoon, while we sprawled on a blanket under the pines, Daniel reached over and brushed a leaf from my hair. "You know, my boyish charm is working overtime," he teased. I laughed, rolling my eyes. "My boy, you mean? Don't forget, I'm older and wiser." He smirked, leaning close. "My queen, don't forget, I like it that way." We both burst into laughter, but in that moment, I believed him. I believed every word. At night, when we curled into each other, I would whisper, "Do you ever regret this? Being with me, someone who's lived a whole life before you." His arms tightened around me. "Regret? Never. You're my queen, Victoria. You've built an empire from nothing. You're the strongest woman I know. Why would I want anyone else? His words soothed me, stroked wounds that had never fully healed. He made me feel cherished in ways I didn't know I craved. For the first time, I allowed myself to rest, to stop fighting every second of every day. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that I could trust him to fight alongside me. Friends would sometimes raise their eyebrows at our age difference. A few whispered, others congratulated me for snagging a younger man. I brushed it off, telling myself none of that mattered. What mattered was the way he looked at me as if I were the only woman in the world. My company thrived during those years. Contracts multiplied, employees grew, and I was no longer just the woman with a mop and a dream. I was a CEO standing tall in boardrooms, making decisions that shaped lives. Yet every evening, no matter how stressful the day, I came home to Daniel's arms and felt like simply a woman, not a machine of survival. There was a night we were sitting on the balcony with glasses of wine, Denver's lights glittering below us, when he turned to me with a mischievous grin. "Tell me again," he said. "What?" "That thing you call me." I smiled, shaking my head. "My boy." "And you're?" "My queen," I finished for him. He kissed me then, slow and lingering, and I thought, maybe I had finally outrun the shadows of my past. Maybe this was my reward for all the battles I had fought alone. Looking back now, I almost envy the woman I was then, the one who believed happiness had finally found her, who believed trust wasn't a gamble, but a certainty. I didn't know how fragile that peace was, how carefully it had been staged. But in those 3 years, I allowed myself to live in the illusion, and it felt so achingly real. 3 years. I could hardly believe it. 3 years of marriage to Daniel, and not once had I woken up feeling alone. For a woman who had once carried every burden on her shoulders, that alone felt like a miracle. So when our anniversary approached, I imagined maybe a dinner, perhaps a bouquet of lilies, my favorite, or even just an evening curled together with a bottle of wine. What I did not expect was what awaited me that morning. I came downstairs to find Emily already dressed for school, Daniel leaning against the counter with that grin that always made him look younger than he already was. On the table sat a glossy envelope, sealed with gold foil. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," he said, eyes sparkling. Inside were 2 tickets. Round trip. Destination, a luxury resort in the Rocky Mountains. The kind I used to see in magazines, but never thought I'd step foot in. My breath caught. "Daniel," I whispered, looking up at him. "This must have cost." He pressed a finger to my lips, shaking his head. "Don't say it. This isn't about money. This is about us." He leaned closer, his voice soft, intimate. "I saw your dreams. I wanted to make them real." The words melted me. For so long, my dreams had been about survival, keeping the lights on, keeping food on the table, keeping my daughter safe. I had forgotten what it meant to dream beyond necessity. And here he was reminding me. I hugged him, burying my face in his chest. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said, kissing the top of my head. "But I wanted to." That night, I packed with a giddiness I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. Emily teased me as I fussed over which sweaters to bring. "Mom," she said, rolling her eyes, "it's just a trip, not the Oscars." "Spoken like someone who doesn't know how rare it is," I told her, laughing. "Someday you'll understand." Daniel chimed in from the doorway. She's excited because she gets to show off her skiing skills and laugh at me falling on my face. I pointed at him with mock sternness. "That's true, my boy, but you'll survive." We drove up 2 days later. The road wound through pine forests heavy with snow, the mountains rising higher with every mile. Daniel reached for my hand across the console, squeezing it gently. "Happy anniversary, my queen," he said. The resort appeared like something out of a dream. Timber lodges with stone fireplaces, windows glowing warm against the icy backdrop. Staff greeted us with champagne and soft music. I felt like I had stepped into a life I had only ever imagined. That first evening, we dined by firelight. The room hummed with the murmur of other guests, but all I could hear was his voice, his laugh. He raised his glass. "To us," he said simply. "To us," I echoed, my throat tightening with emotion. Later, back in our suite, I stood at the window looking out at the slopes illuminated under the moonlight. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You deserve this," he whispered. "I don't know if I do," I murmured. "Yes, you do. You've carried the world on your shoulders long enough. Let me carry it for a while." Tears burned in my eyes as I turned to kiss him. In that moment, I believed him completely. I believed I was safe, that I had finally found the partner who saw me not as a burden, but as a woman worth cherishing. The next morning, he signed us up for the annual festival held at the resort. There would be races, music, and even a daring bikini ski run that locals boasted about. He teased me endlessly about entering. "Come on, Victoria," he laughed. "Show them what my queen can do." I swatted his arm, grinning. "You just want to brag about your wife, don't you?" "Always," he said, leaning down to kiss me. I lay awake that night, my body exhausted from skiing, but my heart light, filled with joy. 3 years ago, I had been alone, convinced love was nothing but pain. Now I was here, wrapped in the arms of a man who seemed to know exactly what I needed. I didn't see the shadows yet. I didn't hear the cracks in his words, or notice the way his smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes. I only saw what I wanted to see: love, devotion, a future. And for that brief, fleeting moment, it was enough. The resort was alive with music and laughter the next morning. Bright flags fluttered along the slopes. Vendors handed out steaming cups of cocoa, and crowds gathered in clusters, their breath turning to mist in the frigid air. It was the annual festival, Daniel explained, a mix of competitions and spectacles designed to draw both professionals and tourists. I had barely finished my coffee when I noticed the posters advertising the bikini ski run, an infamous highlight of the festival. Women, and sometimes men, would shed their heavy gear and hurtle down the slope in nothing but swimsuits, cheered on by the crowd. Daniel's grin widened when he caught me staring at the sign. "My queen," he teased, "this is your chance to make history." I rolled my eyes, though my lips betrayed a smile. "You just want me to freeze to death in front of hundreds of strangers." "Not at all," he said, feigning innocence. "I just want everyone to know what I already do, that you're fearless." The challenge lodged itself in me. For years, my life had been nothing but responsibility, burden, and survival. Maybe, just maybe, I deserved one reckless moment. I signed up. When my name was called, I stripped down to a sapphire blue bikini that matched the turquoise set I had bought weeks earlier. Goosebumps rippled across my skin as the wind bit into me, but the adrenaline drowned it out. The crowd roared, cowbells clanged, cameras flashed. I could feel my heart pounding, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, a hunger to feel alive, unchained, invincible. I pushed off. The world became a blur of white and speed. The snow hissed beneath my skis, the wind tore at my hair, and the cheers rose like a storm behind me. My body remembered every lesson, every slope I had ever conquered. I leaned into the turns, legs burning, muscles taut, laughter bubbling in my chest. For those fleeting seconds, I was weightless, fearless, flying. Then it happened. A sharp sting at the side of my neck, so sudden I gasped. At first, I thought it was the wind, a trick of the cold. But then my vision flickered, the edges darkening as if the world were closing in on me. My legs wobbled. The skis beneath me blurred. "What?" The word barely left my lips. The slope tilted, twisted. I tried to fight it, to steady myself, but the strength drained from my body like water spilling from a broken glass. Panic clawed at me. I could hear the crowd, muffled now, distant like echoes through water. My chest tightened, my pulse hammered in my ears. I reached up instinctively, my fingers brushing the spot on my neck that still throbbed. A dart? A sting? I couldn't tell. The snow beneath me rushed closer. My skis tangled, and I fell, the world jolting violently before spinning away. I remember the taste of snow, sharp and metallic on my tongue, and the wild thought, this can't be happening, not here, not now. The sky fractured into shards of blue and white. My limbs felt heavy, distant, as if they no longer belonged to me. The noise of the festival faded entirely, replaced by a low, insistent hum that seemed to come from inside my own head. I tried to scream, but only a whisper escaped. My last sight before everything dissolved was the turquoise glint of my earring in the snow, catching the sunlight like a cruel reminder. And then darkness. It wasn't the gentle darkness of sleep. It was a suffocating void, cold and endless, pulling me down into silence. My body gave in, my mind tumbled after, and the world I had built, the love I had trusted, slipped away in a single, merciless blackout. The first thing I felt was the weight of the blanket, heavy, woolen, pressing down on my chest. Then the crackle of firewood, sharp and uneven, and the faint smell of broth. I forced my eyes open, blinking against the blur of flickering light. I wasn't on the mountain anymore. The walls around me were wooden, rough-hewn, and the ceiling sloped low. A small fire burned in the stone fireplace. On the table beside me sat a steaming bowl of soup, its scent rich and salty, as if it had been waiting for me. Panic shot through me like ice water. My last memory was the slope, the sting at my neck, the ground rushing up as I lost control. My pulse quickened. I sat up too quickly, dizziness flooding me, and clutched at the blanket. That's when I saw him. A man sat in a chair a few feet away, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, studying me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with lines etched into his face that spoke of years harder than most men could endure. His dark hair was streaked with gray, his jaw rough with stubble. My voice cracked as it tore out of me. "Who are you? Why am I here?" He didn't move right away, just raised his hand slowly, palms open in a gesture of peace. "Name's Mark Sullivan," he said. His voice was low, calm, but carried weight. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." Safe. The word felt foreign, meaningless. My chest heaved. "You're a stranger." I glanced around the cabin, searching for my clothes, for a phone, for anything familiar. All I found was more wood, more shadows. Where is my husband? Where is Daniel? Mark leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "He's at the resort, and he thinks you didn't make it down that slope." I froze. "What do you mean by that?" "You passed out." He gestured toward the bowl of soup. "Poison, or something close to it, would have killed you if I hadn't pulled you off that mountain." I shook my head violently. "No, that's impossible. I must have just fainted. You don't faint from a dart to the neck." His words cut through me like a blade. He reached into his jacket and pulled something from his pocket. A small dart, thin, metallic, with just a trace of crimson at its tip. He laid it on the table between us. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. My skin crawled as if I could still feel its sting. "Eat," he said quietly, pushing the bowl toward me. "You need strength." "I don't want your food." My voice rose, trembling. "I don't even know you." Mark sighed, running a hand over his face. "Fair enough. But if I wanted you dead, you wouldn't be sitting here asking questions. You're alive because I made a choice to keep you that way." His calmness only fueled my fury. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, my body trembling. "Why? Why me? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said simply. "At least, not what you're thinking. You're here because someone wanted you gone, and I couldn't go through with it." The words sank in slowly, heavy and suffocating. Someone wanted me gone. Not sick, not injured. Dead. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. Mark was beside me in 2 strides, catching my arm before I hit the floor. "Easy," he murmured. I jerked away from his touch. "Don't." He didn't force it, only stepped back, giving me space. "Fine, but you're weak, and your body's still fighting whatever they pumped into you. You need rest. And answers. I can give you both. I sank back onto the bed, my breath ragged. My mind spun with questions, but one burned hotter than the rest. Who did this? My voice cracked. Who wanted me dead? Mark's eyes held mine, steady and unflinching. You already know. The fire popped in the silence that followed, throwing sparks against the stone. My heart pounded as if it might break through my ribs. Daniel. No. I shoved the thought away, clinging to denial like a lifeline. Daniel loved me. He had surprised me with this trip, held me in his arms, whispered promises against my skin. He wouldn't, but the dart glinted on the table, cold and undeniable. I pulled the blanket tighter, my nails digging into the fabric, and whispered, almost to myself, No, it can't be. Mark didn't argue. He only set the soup on the nightstand, placed a folded set of clothes beside it, and stood. Eat when you're ready. I'll be outside. The door creaked shut behind him, leaving me with nothing but the fire, the soup, and the growing terror that the man I trusted most in the world had just tried to erase me from it. I sat there, wrapped in the heavy wool blanket, staring at the dart on the table as if it were a serpent ready to strike again. My thoughts spun, colliding with denial at every turn. Daniel he wouldn't have. The door creaked open and Mark stepped back inside. He carried himself with the deliberate calm of a man who had faced danger before and wasn't easily rattled. He pulled a chair closer to the fire, sat down, and studied me with those sharp gray eyes. You want answers, he said. I swallowed hard, my voice still trembling. Yes, tell me everything. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. A month ago, I got a message through one of my usual channels. No name attached, just a file, encrypted, professionally done. The kind you don't stumble across unless someone really wants to cover their tracks. Payment was offered up front, wired through a chain of accounts that took me 3 days to trace. And the job was simple. He paused, letting the words settle like ash in the air. Eliminate Victoria Hayes. The room spun again. My fingers dug into the blanket until my knuckles ached. You're lying, I whispered. That can't be true. Mark's gaze didn't waver. He pulled a battered flash drive from his jacket pocket, placing it on the table beside the dart. This is the file. Photos of you, your schedule, notes about your jewelry store visits, your company board meetings. Whoever hired me knew everything. Too much for it to be a stranger. My chest tightened, the fire's warmth doing nothing to stop the chill seeping through me. Then who? His voice dropped, steady and unflinching. Your husband is the one who ordered your death. The words slammed into me, knocking the air from my lungs. For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, waiting for a punchline that never came. No, I managed, shaking my head. Daniel, he loves me. He took me here, to this resort. He held me last night, called me his queen. Mark's jaw tightened. I tailed him. Watch the way he lived before you. Daniel Hayes isn't who you think he is. He's been surviving off wealthy women for years. Charming, moving in, draining them. You were just the next step. Images flashed through my mind. Daniel's easy smile, his lavish surprises, the way he seemed to step into my world so seamlessly. Had it all been rehearsed? Mark continued, his tone low but cutting. He plays the part until it stops paying, and then he moves on. You've got assets, a company in your name, properties. To him, you're not a wife. You're a jackpot, and once you were out of the way, everything would fall neatly into his hands. My stomach churned. I pressed my palms to my temples, trying to block out his voice, but his words burrowed deeper. I didn't want to believe it either, he admitted. When the job first came in, I told myself it was just another name, another contract. But something didn't add up. Too clean, too detailed. So I dug, and what I found made me sick. He leaned forward, his eyes locking on mine. Your husband ordered the kill, Victoria, not a rival. Not a stranger. Him. I shook my head, tears spilling hot down my cheeks. Why are you telling me this? If you're a hitman, why didn't you just— Because I've done things I can't erase, Mark said quietly. Things that keep me up at night. But when I saw your file, when I saw you— He stopped, running a hand over his face. I couldn't do it. Not this time. I told myself I'd just walk away. But then I saw you on that slope, and I knew someone else would finish the job if I didn't step in. So I acted. He gestured to the clothes he had left for me. You're alive because I chose to save you. That's the only reason you're sitting here. I buried my face in my hands, sobbing silently. Every memory of Daniel twisted inside me. Poison now. His laughter, his kisses, his promises, all masks hiding a man who saw me as nothing more than a payday. Mark didn't move closer, didn't try to touch me. He simply sat by the fire, watching, letting me shatter in silence. When I finally looked up, my voice was raw. What do I do now? He met my eyes, steady, unyielding. You decide if you want to keep living in his lie, or if you're ready to take it back. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the fire, my mind trying and failing to process the nightmare Mark had laid out. My husband wanted me gone. My life was supposed to have ended on that slope. Every tender word, every kiss, every promise, nothing but camouflage for his greed. When I finally found my voice, it was raw, almost unrecognizable. What happens now? Mark studied me for a long moment before answering. If you go back, he'll finish what he started. And next time, you won't get a second chance. I clenched the blanket tighter, anger beginning to boil beneath the grief. So what do I do? Run. Hide while he takes everything I've built. His eyes flickered with something that looked like respect. No, you fight smart, but first you survive. That means making him believe he succeeded. The words settled over me like a shadow, faking my death, letting the world, even my own daughter, think I was gone. It felt unbearable, but the alternative was worse. Mark pulled a notebook from his jacket, its pages filled with codes and sketches. We'll create a trail, medical reports, missing persons, a body no one can identify, quickly. By the time the authorities close the case, Daniel will be celebrating his new inheritance. I swallowed hard, while rising in my throat. And Emily? My daughter, what about her? His voice softened. Once we're clear, once it's safe, I'll get you to her. But you need to trust me now. If he even suspects you're alive, he'll come after you again. I hated the logic of it, hated that my survival depended on deception. But as I thought of Emily's face, the choice became simple. Lie for her, and then take everything back. The next days blurred into a strange rhythm. Mark worked with precision, making calls from burner phones, arranging for forged documents. He seemed to know exactly who to contact, which strings to pull. I realized then that this wasn't his first time navigating the underworld. But unlike the faceless man who had been hired to end me, he was now the man keeping me alive. He took me back to Denver under cover of night. We didn't return to my house. It wasn't safe. Instead, he led me to the warehouse where my company had first been born. Dust coated the shelves now, but my old safe was still hidden in the corner behind false paneling. My hands shook as I spun the lock, retrieving the emergency cash I had stashed years ago, a habit from the days when I didn't know if I'd make rent. Mark glanced at the stacks of bills, then at me. This will fund the next step. Switzerland. New identity. New life for now. When he handed me a new passport days later, I stared at the name printed there. It wasn't mine. It felt like looking at a stranger. Victoria Hayes is dead, he reminded me. That's what Daniel needs to believe. For your daughter's sake, for your own. The flight was a blur. I kept my head low, my heart racing every time someone glanced in my direction. Mark never left my side. By the time the plane touched down in Zurich, I was trembling from exhaustion, from fear, from the crushing weight of pretending I didn't exist. And then Emily. The moment I saw her, standing in their rival's hall with wide eyes, I broke. I ran, and she ran, and when I pulled her into my arms, the dam shattered. I sobbed into her hair, holding her so tightly she squeaked in protest. "I'm here, baby," I whispered, rocking her back and forth. "Mom's not gone. I'm here." Her tears soaked my shoulder as she clung to me. "They told me you were." "No." I cut her off, cupping her face in my hands. "I'm alive, and I'll never leave you again." For that one moment, all the fear, all the betrayal melted away. There was only her heartbeat against mine, steady and real, anchoring me back to life. Later, when she slept curled beside me in the small, flat Mark had secured for us, I sat by the window, watching the Swiss city lights twinkle against the night sky. I felt the familiar fire of resolve flare inside me. Daniel thought he had won. He thought I was buried under the snow, another tragic accident. But I was here, alive with my daughter in my arms and a man who had risked everything to save me, watching over us. I would grieve later. I would heal later. But revenge? Revenge would come first. The weeks that followed in Switzerland were both the slowest and the fastest of my life. Slow, because every night I woke in a sweat, haunted by the memory of the slope, the sting in my neck, Daniel's smile that now felt like a mask. Fast, because with Emily beside me again, the days filled with the ordinary rhythm of love I thought I had lost forever. Making breakfast together, walking through quiet streets, helping her with schoolwork. She didn't ask many questions at first. She was too afraid, I think, that the answers might pull me away again. But every so often, when she'd catch me staring off into nothing, she would take my hand. "You're here now, Mom," she'd whisper as if to anchor me, and I'd squeeze back, promising silently that nothing would tear me away from her again. My body began to recover, though the weakness lingered. The poison, whatever it was, left a shadow in my veins, but I forced myself to grow stronger, for Emily and for what lay ahead. I knew I couldn't hide forever. It was one cold evening when Mark appeared again. He knocked lightly before stepping inside, the winter wind curling around him as he shut the door. Emily was asleep, curled on the couch with a blanket tucked under her chin. "Got something for you," he said, pulling a small box from his coat pocket. He placed it in my hands without explanation. I opened it slowly, my breath catching. Inside was the turquoise earring I had lost on the slope, the stone glinting faintly in the lamplight. "I thought it was gone," I whispered. "Found it near where you fell," he said simply. "Figured it should be back where it belongs." The sight of it brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a piece of myself, a piece of the woman I had been before everything shattered. I closed the box and held it to my chest, my voice breaking. "Thank you." We sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between us. Then, without looking at me, he said, "I know what you're thinking. About going back. About facing him." I swallowed hard. I can't let him win, Mark. If I disappear, he gets everything. My company, my home, my life. He'll rewrite my story. And Emily, she'll grow up believing her mother was weak enough to vanish. His gaze was steady. "Then we make a plan. But you need to know it won't be easy. He'll fight. Men like him always do." I laughed bitterly. I've been fighting my whole life. This time, I just want to fight for me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us shifted, charged with something I didn't want to name. He was a stranger who had saved me, a man who carried shadows of his own. Yet here, he was the only person standing between me and oblivion. Finally, I found the words that had been lodged in my throat. "I don't know if I can ever trust a man again." Mark turned his head toward me, his expression unreadable, his voice steady. "Then let me earn it." The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile all at once. I looked at him, really looked at the lines etched into his face, the weariness in his eyes, the quiet strength he carried. Something stirred in me, dangerous and unfamiliar. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of it. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. But when he stood to leave, I caught his hand for the briefest second, a silent acknowledgement that his words hadn't fallen into emptiness. As the door closed behind him, I held the turquoise earring in my palm and stared at the sleeping form of my daughter. The pain of betrayal still burned inside me, but now it was tempered by something sharper, more enduring, resolve. Daniel thought he had buried me under snow and silence, but I was alive, and when I returned, I would not come back broken. I would come back ready. The day I returned to Denver, the city felt both familiar and foreign. The skyline was the same, the air just as thin, but I wasn't the same woman who had left. I walked through the streets like a ghost who had clawed her way back from the grave. Every step carried the weight of betrayal, but also the strength of survival. Mark had done his part, setting up the timing, arranging the details, so I would walk into that office at the precise moment Daniel thought his victory was sealed. I had spent sleepless nights rehearsing what I would say, how I would hold myself. But no amount of preparation could truly steady the storm inside me. The law office was a stately building downtown, its walls lined with mahogany and books that smelled of dust and power. I waited in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs, listening as the muffled voices carried from inside the conference room. I could hear Daniel's, low, mournful, dripping with false grief. She was the love of my life, he told them. Losing Victoria, it's unbearable, but she would want me to continue her legacy, to take care of everything she built. My stomach turned. The audacity of his performance was almost impressive. He sounded broken, devastated, a perfect widower. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms until the sting grounded me. The lawyer cleared his throat. As the spouse, Mr. Hayes, you stand to inherit the majority of her estate, including her controlling shares in Hayes Cleaning Services, pending the final paperwork. Silence fell. I imagined Daniel's face then, carefully schooled into grief even as triumph sparked behind his eyes. He thought he had won. That was when I pushed open the door. The room froze. Heads turned. The lawyer's pen slipped from his hand. And Daniel went pale, the color draining from his face as if he were the one who had seen a ghost. I stepped forward, my heels echoing on the polished floor. For a moment, I let the silence hang, let everyone drink in the impossibility of me standing there. Alive, breathing, whole. His lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes widened, darting from me to the lawyer and back again, searching for some explanation that would make this nightmare vanish. I held his gaze, steady and cold. My voice cut through the stillness like a blade. Did you really think I'd die that easily? The lawyer looked between us, confused, stammering. Mrs. Hayes? But we were told. I know what you were told, I said, never looking away from Daniel. He told you. He told everyone. Daniel finally found his voice, though it trembled. Victoria, I thought you were gone. Save it, I snapped, the venom in my words silencing him. You wanted me gone. You paid to make it happen. And when you thought it worked, you came here, ready to collect what never belonged to you. Gasps rippled around the table. The lawyer fumbled with his glasses, papers rustling nervously. Daniel's mask cracked. He took a step forward, then stopped when he saw the steel in my eyes. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I cut him off. I was your ticket, your shortcut, and when you were done pretending, you tried to erase me. But I'm still here, and everything you thought you could steal is still mine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's hands trembled at his sides, his perfect composure unraveling in front of an audience he could no longer control. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the strength of every battle I had ever fought pressing me forward. You've taken enough from me. Today you lose. The lawyer cleared his throat again, his voice cautious. Well, in light of these developments, Mr. Hayes, I'm afraid any inheritance is, of course, null and void. Daniel staggered back as though struck. His mouth opened, closed, no words left. He had gambled everything on my absence, and I had just shattered his hand. I turned then, my pulse steady, my heart fierce. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. And I walked out, leaving him standing in the ruins of his own lies. The air in the conference room was suffocating, thick with shock. The lawyer's words still echoed, null and void. I stepped closer to the table, where the folder with the will lay open. My hands didn't tremble as I picked up the papers. For a moment, I stared at my own name on the document, my legacy reduced to legal language and signatures. Then, without hesitation, I tore it straight down the middle. The sound ripped through the silence like thunder. Daniel flinched. "Victoria, please! Don't you dare say my name." I cut him off, my voice sharp, steady. "You forfeited the right to speak at the day you decided my death was more valuable than my life." The lawyer's jaw slackened, his pen slipping again. The assistants sat frozen, their eyes wide. No one moved. No one dared to intervene. I turned toward Daniel, the shredded pieces of paper still in my hands. "You get nothing," I said, my tone final. "Not my company, not my home, not my daughter's respect. Nothing. All you'll carry from me is the shame of being exposed for what you are, a coward who couldn't build, only steal." His mask shattered then. Gone was the grieving widower. Gone was the charming young husband. In his place stood a man stripped bare, desperate, cornered. His lips trembled, his hands twitching at his sides, as if grasping for excuses that no one would ever believe again. "You don't understand," he began, but I stepped closer, my gaze burning into his. "I understand perfectly. You saw me as a prize. You thought I was just another woman you could drain dry before moving on. But you miscalculated, Daniel. You didn't marry a prize. You married a survivor." The room was so quiet I could hear the fire from the lobby crackling through the door. Daniel's eyes darted, searching for support but found none. Even the lawyer avoided his gaze. I dropped the torn pieces of the will at his feet. "Pick them up if you want," I said coldly. "Frame them. Remind yourself every day of what you lost, not because I died, but because I lived." He staggered back, his lips forming silent protests. Then he turned and left, his shoulders hunched, the door slamming behind him. And just like that, the man who once called me queen walked out of my life with nothing. I exhaled, my body trembling, not from fear, but from release. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by betrayal or illusions. I had faced the monster in my home and cast him out. As I stepped into the hallway, the late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, bathing everything in gold. Mark was there, leaning against the wall, waiting. His presence steadied me in ways I couldn't explain. When our eyes met, something in my chest unclenched. "Well," he asked softly. "It's done," I said. My voice cracked, but it carried relief. "He has nothing. Not anymore." Mark nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less. "Good. That's what he deserves." We walked outside together, the city humming around us. People passed by, unaware that just minutes ago, a man's empire of lies had collapsed. For me, the world had shifted on its axis. For them, it was just another Thursday. We stopped on the steps, the cool air brushing my face. I clutched the little box in my coat pocket, the turquoise earring he had returned to me weeks ago. It was no longer a reminder of what I had lost, but of what I had reclaimed. I turned to him, my voice low. "I don't know what happens next. I don't even know if I'm ready to trust, to feel again." He looked at me, steady and unflinching. "You don't have to know right now. You just have to live. The rest we'll figure out." Something inside me softened. I had lived too long in shadows, too long with a man who smiled at me while plotting my end. Standing beside Mark, I felt something different, not a fairy tale, not illusions, but a steady strength that mirrored my own. I took a deep breath, the city lights beginning to glow as the sun dipped lower. My daughter was safe, my company intact, my freedom restored. And Daniel, he was left with nothing but the ruins of his own betrayal. For once, the world didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt open, possible. I looked at Mark, my lips curving into the smallest of smiles. And in a voice that was almost a whisper, I said, "I finally feel free." The words settled into the air like a vow, a promise to myself, a closing of one chapter, and the fragile, beautiful beginning of another.